sit down with and ask them to tell us a little bit about their experiences with this issue. I hope that you'll be asking questions. Feel free to ask as you go along. Don't wait till the end to ask questions. Ask them anything you want to ask them at any time. That's what a colloquy is. We talk to each other. Okay. All right. So Chloe, why don't you start?
Sure. My name is Chloe Manor. I work for the Alice Springs Community Foundation, and I wear a couple of different hats there. And I haven't been there for very long. I've only been there for about 6 months. But I started there running the lab. I'm pretty new to Alice Springs too. I've only been here about a year and a half. So I'm not quite different, but I'm learning a lot by working with YS Equity. And just to explain a little bit about YS Equity, if folks don't know or haven't heard of the program, it's a guaranteed income program that provides $300 unrestricted cash to folks that are living in Yellow Springs and Miami Township are at or below about 300% poverty level. And we have a lottery, and we have a lottery every 6 months, and I have a lot more information I could talk about this, but that's what YS Equity does here in Yellow Springs.
I'm Beth Rubin. I'm the director of the Greene County Department of Water Services, which has a wide variety of government programs, child protective services, adult protective services, and more. I've been there for 25 years, and I have of everything, usually when people are able to interact with specific.
I'm John Gudgel, representing the Yellow Springs. My current position, along with any that I've had during my 43-year tenure, I'm currently the guidance counselor in Millsline Elementary School. So I'm a humorous guy, so it's nice to see so many of you here. I just left the building, up in Millsline, and I think that's more. Anyway, that being said, I feel like I'm in front line of issues around poverty as things based on the figure, the numbers that we have, 25.4% of our students are classified as and in some instances, it's underreported. That figure may be missed in terms of identifiable disadvantaged children. We have 25.4. So I'll get into what you feel about that. But I often feel like I'm the go-to person. And they say, what can I do about it?
I'm Emily Seibel with Yellow Springs Homemade, and we do a variety of permanently affordable housing and programs. So more about our housing than they probably know about our program. So all of our housing is permanently affordable. It's in a community land trust governed by the community through shared governance. And in addition to rentals and homeownership, affordable to persons with low to moderate income, we also have a variety of programs, including financial coaching and advising. We also provide really low interest mortgages in-house, as low as 1% with subsidies. We also do refinancing if folks have a mortgage but find they can no longer afford it to lower their payment. We have home repair programs. This year we are passing through $300,000 in home repair grants at an average of about $13,000 a month. And that portal is always open. So if you or someone you know could benefit from a health, safety, or accessibility, or even modernization, home repair, the portal is always open for folks to apply. And then a couple of different times a year, we line up projects. So we do anticipate having quite a bit of money next year still. So the opportunity. I guess I would say that the first point that I would make about poverty is that it exists in Yellow Springs. And I think sometimes we wear rose-colored glasses or have an image of ourselves as an affluent community. But I think there are multiple lived experiences in Yellow Springs. And you know, just because someone lives here doesn't mean that they're not burdened by the cost of their home. And housing is the primary lens that all brings together. But I think it's often less visible in rural communities, and it comes with stigma and misunderstanding. And people are probably less likely to disclose that they are struggling. And unfortunately, it's so often tied to misconceptions, to inferiority, historically. I don't mean just in Yellow Springs, they're more broad, widespread. But the truth is that anybody can experience poverty without life-changing circumstances and also face barriers of opportunity. So I have a lot more to say about that.
Let's go back to the beginning here and let Chloe tell us how her work feels.
Also, Quiet Cycling was started by an amazing person named Len Kramer, who's in the room, owner of it's really new. So we're just about to start our third cohort. So there are currently 30 people that are enrolled in the program, and we will continue to devote people. We'll eventually get to a place where we want to have 30 people enrolled at any given time. But it was important to onboard people. We'll have, you know, the most we'll have is 45, and we're going to finish back down to 30. Where we're at right now. And you know, the concept of guaranteed income is fairly new, but it needs a lot of interest and a lot of power in the movement for guaranteed income. And where, you know, 5 years ago there were a couple. There was one project that started in California, and now there are over. And when we started YS Equity, when YS Equity started, the only guaranteed income program in the States. And I haven't heard of any other ones that are operating on a small scale like we are here in Yellow Springs. But one of the really interesting things that brought me into the work is the idea of wealth redistribution, right? And on a scale of a small place like Yellow Springs, that people can really sort of start walking the talk by taking money, if they have extra money, and basically putting it into the pockets of their neighbors. And it's an interesting project because it's very important. The confidentiality part of it is very important. We don't want to out people. We don't want to talk about, you know, whose neighbor is on YS Equity. It's, you know, that part of it is really important. But most of us probably know people that are enrolled in the program, or we might even be enrolled in the program ourselves. And so the cool thing about, there are lots of cool things about YS Equity, but one of them is that a lot of the urban guaranteed income projects, you know, they're happening in cities where there are really large populations. And so their impact, while is, you know, very felt, doesn't happen on as widespread a scale as it can happen sort of per capita here. So whereas we work with the Center for Guaranteed Income Research and Impact, and they were, you know, blown away when we said, well, we want to reach 10% of the folks that live in our area that are at or below the poverty level. And 10% is way bigger than any other project that's happening in the country, but that's because we're such a small town too. So because of that, and also because we're really interested in funding this program into perpetuity, it's such an experiment right now with guaranteed income, and lots of these projects, like I say, there are more than 100. A lot of them, they're finding the funding, they're figuring out how to do it for a short period of time, but I think it was always part of the idea that this project would start and it wouldn't stop. It would just continue on, that there's always going to be a need and an opportunity for wealth redistribution in Yellow Springs. And it was set out to be a project that, if we can fund it, would just continue. Yes.
You know, when you said that the impact here is so much greater because we're such a small community, that also means that the impact economically could be felt. If people have $300 a month extra income, they might spend it on more groceries at time. We could all tell you where that money is going.
Yes.
We might actually, if I weren't married to Len, I'd be eligible, but I am. But that we all might feel the impact of our neighbors having extra money.
Yes.
I mean, it might show up in, I don't even know where, in the restaurants. But when you have extra money, you're willing to do things that you're not living just hand to mouth.
Yes.
So it would have an income, it would have an impact on the whole village, potentially,
Yes.
economically.
Yeah, and one thing I would just say about that is there's really interesting research that's been done and that is continuing to be done. And, we are working with one of the, the agency, Penn Center for Guaranteed Income Research, and they're interviewing people that are that are involved in YS equity. And those people are taking surveys every 6 months with the idea that we can look as a community and say, not just what does guaranteed income mean in the bigger picture in the United States, but what does it mean right here in Yellow Springs? And Tony, you and I had talked about this idea of trying to figure out or track where people spend their money, but it's sort of a sticky wicket, right? Because we also really want to maintain the ability for people to be really confidential about what they're doing with their money. And part of it is really based on trust. And that's what the whole model of guaranteed income is based on. You don't have to tell me what you're spending every single cent of your money on. It's incredible to sort of see, and it makes sense, but as they're conducting these research projects, people are spending money on what people need to spend money on. They're spending it on housing, groceries, and for their kids to get new clothes and all the things that we need money for. So the proof is sort of really it's been really incredible to sort of see these studies come out to give proof, because as you might imagine, there's a lot of skepticism about this type of program that exists as well. Yes.
I have a couple of questions. One of them is, what is the poverty level right now? Is it always written as for a family of four? It is
In Yellow Springs or in Miami Township in particular? Is that what you're saying?
Isn't there a federal poverty level?
Yeah.
Oh, you mean what is the federal poverty level? Yeah.
In 2022, it was an annual income of $13,590.
And that's per individual?
I believe so.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, we use the area median income data for our programs, which is different than the federal poverty.
Thank you.
And we fund up to, so somebody can apply for YS equity if they make up to, it's last year's federal poverty guidelines, but basically it amounts to about $40,000 for one person. The way that the lottery works is that it's weighted. And so you're more likely to be chosen for the lottery if you're on the lower end of that spectrum, but you still have a chance to be chosen even if you're on the higher end of that.
And the second question I have is, you talk about you want this to go on into perpetuity, and the only way that could happen is through endowments. Is that correct?
Yes. So the way that we're looking at this right now at the Community Foundation is there were two very large anonymous donations. One of them that came from outside of the village, just from someone that used to live here but doesn't anymore, and from somebody that lives in the village currently. And so that gives us a little bit of runway. But what we have to do in the meantime is, as we're proving, right, or as we're finding out how this is working in our community, that we need to be raising money. So if we build an endowment right now of about $3 million, with the current numbers of YS equity, if about 30 people are enrolled at a time, that will be a sustainable amount to sustain the program into perpetuity. But that's not saying, if we wanted to get higher payments or enroll more people, a lot of space to improve the programming too.
Thank you.
Yes.
So can you tell us how many people applied for those versus the 15 or 30 that you got?
It's been just around 100 people both times. And, we're really trying to work on developing YS equity as a household name. Because the first time, so I just got these flyers printed today for our new cohort, right? And the lottery happens the beginning of November, but you see something like this and it's like, oh, come on, what's the catch? You know, like, you're just gonna give me $300 a month. There must be some class I have to take or something that I have to, it's sort of like somebody told me it looks like publisher's clearing. So I think as we spread the word, I'm gonna be really curious to see, you know, for instance, this time, you know, in November, if we get more people that sign up or not. You know, I think that there's also the question, right? We were talking about this the other day at the DEI committee meeting, and that's the committee that oversees, is like, what does the long term look like? We're saying we want to fund this into perpetuity, but does that look like families can apply more than once in a 10-year period of time? Or families that haven't applied or people that haven't applied would get, you know, would be able to get first dibs. So we have a lot of things like that we need to figure out too.
Do you know the percentage of those 100 that applied? How many of those were single households versus families with children?
Yeah, that's a really good question. We do have that data. Of course, I should have brought it with me because people were going to ask me amazing questions tonight. I don't have it with me. It's interesting too, because it's single caregiver households are also weighted in the lottery, so lower spectrum and single caregiver households. We have a lot of folks that are single parents and also single grandparents that are enrolled in the program currently. So we see both of those things. But if you want to give me your information, I'm happy to send out that demographic data. Yeah.
Chloe, what's the magnitude of poverty from your perspective in Yellow Springs? What percentage of the population?
So, do you have those statistics with you?
I don't specifically have those statistics, but some of the statistics that I do have will help paint a picture.
Okay. So your turn is next.
Okay.
If I started YS Equity, and I wasn't the starter, I was just the follower. Angie Sue was the person who got it started. I just helped her out as an Encore Miller Fellow for the foundation. But we estimated 300 people from census data living in poverty in Yellow Springs.
Out of 3,700.
Out of 3,700, that's kids, it's not families, that's people.
And that's at or below the federal poverty level
Yes,
of 13,500.
for a single person.
Yeah, and we accept a lot more, way more people than those 300 people can apply to YS Equity because you can make up to 300% of that. But yeah, that's where we came up with the 10% statistic that we'd like to be able to have impact on 10% of the people that are living under below poverty.
Okay, Beth,
Yeah, so that's interesting what you said. So, and I'll try and tie that in here. So when you think about human services programs and poverty, the first thing that comes to mind are public assistance programs, because those are based on eligibility, based on a family's income and potentially their resources. So a few statistics for Yellow Springs that I pulled before this meeting. In Yellow Springs, there are currently around 280 recipients of the SNAP program, which aligns with your 300 roughly. And that's about 160 families.
Say what SNAP is.
SNAP is the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, more commonly referred to as food stamps, but we don't have food stamps anymore. So the benefits are on an electronic benefit card that is rampant with fraud right now, not by people who are misusing their benefits, but by big scammer entities who are getting into the system where the benefits are put on the cards and they're skimming them off of the cards. It's a huge issue right now.
Yeah, one of my friends went to access their SNAP benefits last month and they had $9 on their card. Because the scammer had stolen the rest and they'll probably never get it back, right?
They can get a replacement
Okay.
of those benefits, but then the recommendation right now is that individuals use, when they get their next month's allotment, they use their EBT card and immediately change their PIN every time they use it. So when we talk about Medicaid, there are in Yellow Springs, I came up with 864 recipients of Medicaid. But, there's a common misconception that both with SNAP and with Medicaid that of who we serve when we talk about those programs. And really what our data shows is that they are primarily seniors, children, and the working poor. They're people who are working, they're just receiving income, they're earning at a level that has them still in need and eligible for these benefits. Then when you talk about the other programs that we have, child support, I don't have Yellow Springs data, but 1 in 3 children in Ohio is connected with the child support program, and child support lowers poverty by about 25%. So, the intent of the program is to not only ensure the success of children by having both parents involved, but addressing poverty and making sure that children have a chance to succeed. Then when you get into our workforce development programs, it's pretty obvious we're helping people find jobs, or if they already have jobs, maybe obtain additional skills and improve their employability and improve their wages so that they're constantly moving forward and having the chance to be even more self-sufficient than they already are. So that helps address poverty. But when we talk about our protective services programs, in particular, child protective services, child abuse and neglect affect all populations. It's not specifically tied to poverty. And I think we all know that. However, poverty certainly is a major stressor on families. And the more stressors that you add to a family, the more potential there is for particularly neglect, but also abuse to occur. So there's definitely a tie in there. That's a lot. What questions? Yes. Susan Alberter is the expert on protected children's services, by the way. You walk through
everything. It's been too long.
know all of it.
Of the numbers of people eligible for SNAP and Medicaid and whatever other assistance programs, how many more people are eligible that haven't applied? Is there any way to determine that?
I wouldn't know how to determine that. There are probably think tanks that review that sort of thing and make those projections, and I don't have that information.
I was just thinking, like, if you had here's the poverty level, in Yellow Springs, but here's the accessing of benefit level, what are these folks?
Right. I don't know. And one of the things that's difficult about that is each of those programs, they don't just work on the poverty level, they work on different percentages of poverty level. And within that, even within Medicaid, a single adult, you're looking at 100% of the federal poverty level, and with expansion up to 133 or 138%. But then if you're looking at children, and pregnant women, it can go up to 150% or maybe up to 200%. So and then if you're a senior, it can be even higher. You just have to pay a portion of your care. So it gets complicated when you look at that.
How are these SNAP cards getting scammed? What's the biggest way that's happening?
So it's like hackers. It's big organized hackers who are doing this.
Type thing.
Exactly.
Okay, John, would you like to say a few words?
Culture of poverty. Poverty for some people is a never ending cycle. It's hard for them to get out of that cycle of the culture of poverty. One of the advantages that I have working in the school system is that I know firsthand the children that are being impacted in terms of poverty. So that gives me an advantage, okay, because we don't have to go through a lot of red tape, bureaucracy and whatnot. We know which of our kids and families are struggling. With that being said, the fact that I know who those families are gives me direct contact. So for example, families are struggling in terms of getting groceries. So I've got X amount of gift certificates to Tom's Grocery because there are generous people in this community who will provide me with gift certificates to Tom's. And so I can immediately hand it to that family, and it says anonymous. And so the fact that I can go directly to those families that are struggling gives me somewhat of an advantage because I know who they are. Other things, this community is so generous. And we have even, believe it or not, given away cars to families. An individual will come to me and say, hey, I want to donate a car. Do you know a family that needs a car because they need transportation for their job? The Lions Club sadly doesn't really exist in Yellow Springs anymore. So we have students who are in need of classes, but again, a generous community will provide funding. And there are optometrists in the area that we network with that will give reduced amounts for eye exams and for prescription glasses. So it's kind of a feel good for me at times to be able to directly see the impact of helping out families that are struggling. Earlier this month, the Yellow Springs Police Department, every year they have a fund for kids who need coats. And so we take 25 kids on the bus to Target, and they can pick out a winter coat and gloves and hats. And then we take them back down to the John Bright Community Center and get a pizza. But just to see the joy and the thrill of these kids who need coats, just to see the smile on their face that someone cares about me and someone's doing something to help me is something that you just can't, you feel in the art. School supplies. My understanding is that the beginning of the school year right now is far outgrossing the money spent during the holidays. And one of the struggles in terms of school supplies is that we don't have this problem in Yellow Springs as much, but I was talking to a group of kids about the shoes that they wear. And for some families who are dealing with issues of poverty, it's so important that they get those Air Jordans for their kids. They'll work overtime. They'll go without paying their utilities because they want their kids to have the latest clothes and the latest fashion. And it's not so much of a problem in Yellow Springs, but at times we do see that because kids, sadly, will tease one another about the clothes that they're wearing or not wearing. Parents feel that. I got to get my son or daughter those Converse shoes or those Air Jordans. Otherwise, my child may be ostracized and teased for not having the latest clothes. The other things that we see in our school is we talked about technology. Someone earlier was complaining about technology's good, technology's bad. We all can think back to the days when kids who were on free reduced lunch, when they went through the lunch line, we knew who they were. We knew who they were. Now, everybody goes to the lunch line, they input a number. You don't know who's on free or reduced lunch. And that is really taken away just shame, because some parents, prior to having the technology advantage, some parents, they would not apply for free or reduced lunch because they were so afraid of their kids being identified or labeled as being poor. So this whole mental, emotional aspect is something that I get to see firsthand in terms of working with children who are in need and or parents. Again, a generous community making donations, and it really took off during the pandemic because we knew there were a lot of families just struggling. But even since the pandemic is over, well, it's not really over, but we still have people who are making donations to the schools. And I think one of the reasons why is, again, they want to avoid the red tape, the bureaucracy. They know that they can come to me and say, hey, here's X amount of dollars for gift certificates to Arms. And they're now on a credit card. Questions? Yeah.
I'm curious, I know you deal with the young children, but you also have been a coach for years. How is poverty affecting children doing extracurriculars and sports?
So the fact that I get to coach, every year I have to buy 2 or 3 of our runners shoes, running shoes. Again, because I know that those families are free reduced. And you have to be very careful in terms of when you give the kid the shoes, because you don't want to do it in front of the whole team. So as a coach and reaching out to coaches of other sports, they will come to me and say, this young lady needs some finished shoes for basketball. And we've got funding all over the cold to go to Dick's Sporting Goods and get them some shoes. Yes.
Do you know the percentage of kids that are on free lunches in our school system?
25.4%.
25.4. And then do we have classes and programs in our upper education on finance so that we can teach ourselves possibly out of poverty?
Yeah, the State Department of Education has mandated, in fact, it was probably in 2010, mandated that financial classes be taught. Now, to the extent that they're taught at the high school, I don't know, because I'm not in that building anymore, but the state has mandated that kids are taught about finances, but we've discovered that we need to talk about finances even with our younger kids. So they got a Mr. Gudgel old man story. I asked him this morning, fourth graders, and you know what a newspaper route is? That's how I learned finance.
Do you know the percentage of students at Yellow Spring schools that don't live in the community but are being transported? Do you know off the top of your head?
Open enrollment, I wish I had my pamphlet. So we have approximately 700 kids in the district, and I would say probably about 150 to 160, and I'm probably off a little bit. So 150, 160 are kids who come to Yellow Springs via open enrollment. But I always say this because sometimes there's criticism of Yellow Springs accepting open enrollment students. Many of those families have a connection to Yellow Springs because their families formerly lived here or their parents are alumni. Generally, there is a Yellow Springs connection, but for whatever reason, I think we know the reason for some of those families that can't live in Yellow Springs, they still live with their kids in Yellow Springs.
Sure.
And then, of course, the tax dollars from those districts that they're coming from follow them to Yellow Springs. So the highest percentage of open enrollment students come from Xenia, Cedarville, and Greene, just across the Greene County line. But that money follows them to Yellow Springs.
You're 25% eligible for free lunch. Would that increase higher than that if you factored in the kids from outside the district, or is that all rolled into one?
So it's all rolled into one.
Okay.
Yeah, it's all rolled.
So it's not that particular thing isn't necessarily a reflection of Yellow Springs
So
children in total. Okay.
in the housing needs assessment, one of the key takeaways was that a quarter of the children who live in Yellow Springs live in poverty. So it's consistent.
And I'm going to throw this out because I think it's important. We talk about stereotypes and assumptions, and this is one of those things as a native of Yellow Springs that blows me away. So just recently, we were able to do a breakdown in terms of our students. 1.2% of our student body are of American Indian or Asian descent. 6.4 are Black, non-Hispanic. 9.0 is Hispanic, 12.5 multiracial, and 70.3 are white. For those of us who grew up here, when you see 6.4% Black, non-Hispanic, and 9% Hispanic, 12.5 multiracial, that's a big shift from where we were 30, 40 years ago as a community. And I put that out there, and I have to say that as an African American, often the assumption that it's only people of color who are poor. It's not true.
And John, I have a question. The recent article in the paper about the academic excellence and the report from the superintendent. And near the end of the report, it said that 30-point-something% absenteeism, which needs to be worked on. And I thought, that's got to be a misprint. Is that possible? And then the 25% that are on assistance, is there a connection there?
So the 30%, I can't answer, but I will say there is a connection with attendance rates in those families that are economically disadvantaged. We do see, and I wouldn't know the exact percentage, Bob, we do see a correlation between kids who don't come to school and also are, their families are on economic disadvantage. We see that. And sometimes it's issues about transportation. Sometimes you get into situations where older kids, if there's a sick kid in the house, they've got to stay home and watch them because parents have to go to work. I mean, there's just so many different stories, but there is a correlation. The percentage of it, I don't know, but we do see that.
Emily, do you want to go ahead and share?
Yeah, so many things occurred to me while everybody was talking. This is really helpful. Your story about the stigma around free and reduced lunches gave me a flashback because I was on free and reduced lunches. And yeah, you had to go up with your little card and then everybody knew that you were a recipient. But I think it's come a long way, but at the same time, kind of like there was the colorblind 90s, and now we're saying it's probably better to acknowledge that race exists. I think it's the same thing with poverty, and removing the stigma and is important, but I think it's also important to address that poverty exists in Yellow Springs and making sure that we're thinking about that and being intentional about it in every decision that we make, that it's a lens that we bring. How is this going to impact people experiencing poverty in Yellow Springs? So I want to talk about housing, but I also just want to talk about poverty more generally. So Home Inc. is part of the Inclusive and Resilient Yellow Springs Coalition, as is the Senior Center, as is the 365 Project, and the Yellow Springs Community Foundation, and LEAF. And anyway, could go on and on. But anyway, we held 2 cost of poverty experience sessions during the pandemic shutdown. And it's a poverty simulation program where you sign up. Some of the folks in the room might have participated, and you get you become part of a family experiencing poverty, and you have so much time, so much money, and so much mental health and physical health and relationships, and you have to navigate challenge after challenge, with not enough time to be healthy and have strong relationships, and not enough money to make your basic needs met. And then afterwards, we talked about it. And so we did a survey of what are the best things our community can do to address the needs of people in poverty. And the top response from those surveys was to invite those with lived experience in poverty to help shape organizational and community policies, practices, and culture. So one of the ways we do that at Home Inc. is we require in our bylaws that a minimum of 1/3 of our board of directors are people who are constituents and homeowners in our program, people of low to moderate income in the community, because we believe that people are the experts of their own experience and that they're in the best position really to identify unique challenges and solutions. But I think it's going to take a lot of solidarity between people living in poverty, and then also in other income brackets across different kinds of divisions in order to really sustain and make our village even more inclusive. So in addition to just poverty exists in Yellow Springs and is often less visible in rural communities, I think something we don't always think about is that it's really expensive to be poor. I'm not just talking about the proportion of your money you're spending on utilities or food, but access to resources that could actually create opportunities or avoid catastrophe. So as an example, I was part of a broad statewide coalition to tackle payday lending in Ohio. Most people in America don't have $500 for an emergency savings. The vast majority of people. So if something happens, if your car breaks down, if your, furnace breaks, maybe you're on a fixed income. I mean, there are so many things that can happen. What do you do? So people that go to payday lenders don't want to go to payday lenders. They have no alternatives.
How do we ever allow that type of industry to exist? It's such a scumbag.
It is. So Ohio had the record in the country of the highest effective interest rate The 355% factored in all the fees. You can never get out of that.
No,
So we capped it at 27%. That's why I really like the bias equity program, because it's not just about investing extra in the economy, it's about having a safety net. And I know there's another program on the way to explore that further. The other thing that can happen in a hot market such as ours, so it's kind of like a hot air balloon. People are clinging on to the side, but eventually, once it's high enough, you kind of have to be at us already up there to get into the basket. You know, so one way to think about that is our average home sale price last year was $352,000. It's probably more than that now. Interest rates today are at about 8%. When you combine those two, you're cutting out at least 75% of the population from accessing housing. The people who can access our housing market either make a lot of money, they are former homeowners and are bringing equity, or they have parents who are helping them or come from some sort of generational wealth. So it makes it just almost impossible for someone of low to moderate income to break into the housing market. So that's one thing, is the barrier for those 150 families who are driving in. The other piece of that is people who are already living here. There are three things that can happen. One is that they're burdened by their housing costs, which if you're paying more than 30% of your gross income to housing, like when I was first living in Yellow Springs, I was paying 70% of my income to housing. And that's not pleasant. I wouldn't wish it on anyone. But if you're paying more than 30%, that means you're probably going to be struggling in other areas to make ends meet. So you might have to choose between getting prescription medication and buying food. And we probably know people or have experienced that ourselves. Even with all of the wonderful programs that exist, it doesn't cover all of the gaps. The second thing that can happen is that there can become real issues of quality that can impact health and safety. If you have home repairs, accessibility needs, and you can't address them, your home can become dangerous and you may not have anywhere to go. And the third is displacement. And so everything we're doing at Home Inc. is trying to tackle both the educational side and access to financing that is fair and not predatory, but also trying to address cost and quality, because those are really the two barriers of affordability. And how that shows up is, you know, you might have a neighbor that owns their home and it's a sturdy home, but you don't see them going to the food pantry because they might be on a fixed income. You know, I think Social Security income right now is about $16,800 a year. Even if you own a home and the mortgage is paid off, how do you survive? And the housing needs assessment showed us there are people on fixed incomes that own homes in Yellow Springs. There are also people who are burdened in how much they're paying for rent, not to mention any health, safety, or quality issues. You might also know someone who's had to move away. I think we probably all do. That's just a fact. Or you might be struggling. I think in Yellow Springs, we see a lot of people on fixed incomes who have a ton of equity in their houses, but they're struggling to make ends meet. They might have bought their homes in the 70s or 80s or 90s when they had one or maybe two incomes and were working, and now they're retired and on fixed income. So the majority of the home repair grants that we allocate are people in that situation where they're living in their home, but they have a very low fixed income and have things that really are impacting health, safety, and accessibility. And then I think we've already talked about children living in poverty, families living in poverty, and that is obviously a systemic issue in Yellow Springs. Housing is a great strategy, because it provides a lot of stability. It can generate wealth, and it's connected to everything. It's connected to pretty much everything. So a lot of different programs working on different kinds of issues end up at housing. It's a social indicator of health. It also is a great predictor of youth outcomes. There are so many different things that are connected to housing, and even life expectancy, which I know this is kind of an emotional one for me to bring up, but you can look up now your life expectancy based on your zip code. And where I live in Yellow Springs, I'm expected to live 13 years longer than some of the folks living in Springfield. That doesn't feel right. So it's an issue of access, but then also an issue of quality of life while you're here and creating alternatives. So we have specific programs geared towards people below 80% of area median income. That is an annual gross income of $49,850 for a one-person household. So it's pretty broad. People qualify sometimes for our home repair programs that didn't think that wouldn't place themselves in as low to moderate income. And so I would just really encourage everybody. We actually had some money left on the table this year. So we ended up doing this fabulous partnership with County Corp to work in West Dayton a little bit, but I know that there was unmet need in Yellow Springs. So please spread the word that we have home repair grants. You can sign up to them on our website. There's an interest form, and it's under the home buyers and homeowner tab on our website. And then the other thing that people don't know about, and this is sort of a moot point right now because you can't close USDA loans during a continuing resolution. So it's impacting our program. But if you have a mortgage and you need some kind of accessibility upgrades or repairs and you fall under that 80% AMI income limit, we can explore refinancing through the USDA loan program. We're one of the only packagers in the state of Ohio, and it's fixed rates. Right now it's 4.125%, but it's subsidized based on your income and what is needed down to 1%. And we also offer that to new home buyers in addition to the affordable housing that we're developing. But there's no down payment, no private mortgage insurance. It's a really good product. And just as an example, we recently worked with a long-term local resident. She reached out to us to say she wanted to rent. And after talking with her, we realized she wanted to own. She wanted to stay in her house. She just couldn't afford it. So we worked with her to refinance, made accessibility improvements and home repairs. And now she's spending hundreds of dollars less a month on her mortgage and able to remain in Yellow Springs. And then we also do financial coaching and advising if you want to safely access some of the equity in your home. That's another conversation that we're happy to have. And of course, there is a renter interest list. As you know, hopefully you all know, we got funded for the first phase of our senior housing project that we've been working on for a long time. It's fully funded. It'll break ground next year. That'll be 8 units. Overall, it's going to end up being 22 units of affordable senior rental housing, and then 10 for sale units. There is a rental interest list. It's always open on our website. We inform everyone once an application opens, and then we hold a lottery to ensure fairness in tenant selection. And we proudly accept Section 8 vouchers, which are now protected under the Yellow Springs source of income protection legislation that was passed last year. And if someone doesn't have a voucher because they expire, if you can't use them and there aren't a lot of places to use them in Yellow Springs, we'll work with you until you get signed up, because we've had a good success rate. So even if we have to do an alternate arrangement until you get into the program, we'll work with folks on that. So that should not be a barrier. And just to give a little indication of the pent up demand, we do have over 300 households on our rental interest list today. Any questions? Yes.
So I can only speak to the renters issue, being a renter in Yellow Springs. And two things that I see as being a huge problem with those that are around me that rent as well, other than the fact that our rental properties are few and far between, are that rental agreements that are increasingly becoming 30-day notices, which, I mean, for a person who's already low income in an area that has few rentals, you're continuously petrified that you're going to get a 30-day notice. I can tell you that if I got a 30-day notice today, I would have to leave Yellow Springs. That's just, we know that that's just the case. The other one is that we have landlords that don't take care of the properties.
Yes.
And we can't get the maintenance. We don't qualify to get the maintenance from your organization for our properties, even though a lot of our properties are not safe. And the biggest issue that most renters are having with safe property in Yellow Springs is mold. And which can be the most health serious of issues. And landlords do not want to address it. There is no law in the state of Ohio that a landlord has to tell you that the property has a mold issue prior to you moving in. And while they require the landlord to take care of it, the landlord can turn around and give you a 30-day notice to leave, stating that remodeling has to occur in order for it to be clean. So the tenants don't live with it. So the tenants just live with it because, again, they have the fear that they're going to turn around and get a 30-day notice. And so they battle with the health and the mold issues.
We've heard that and gotten that feedback before. And I think, I'm sure Tony's wanting to talk right now because she's the project lead for this particular issue. But before you talk, Tony, one of the things that we did host a tenant and landlord rights information session with advocates for basic legal equality. And they are available to provide free legal advice to renters who are experiencing issues. And I think they would also provide support to start some kind of renters union in Yellow Springs, which I know has been thrown around a little bit. And then we're exploring getting some grant funding to help landlords keep rents affordable while upgrading their properties. And we're not ready to roll it out now, but it's something that we're gonna be exploring for next year. And Tony will take it.
I'm the project director of a project that's been in existence for 4 years called Livable, Equitable, Age-Friendly Yellow Springs. We did a very big survey in 21, and one of the issues that came out loud and clear was exactly what you're talking about. The conditions of rental property in the village and the lack of much of it is substandard and not safe. I just literally, I think it was yesterday or the day before yesterday, had a really productive meeting with Meg Leatherman. She's the new planning and zoning staff person in the village, and John Zimmerman from Miami Valley Fair Housing Coalition. And we met on Zoom for about an hour and outlined the village is very aware of this issue, very interested in exploring issues around code enforcement. It's a little complicated, but issues around code enforcement. John Zimmerman gave us some very good advice about, and we are going to be setting up, probably won't happen until the new year, and I'd like to get your name, a group of tenants and meeting separately. His recommendation was to meet separately with tenants and with landlords to do some listening sessions about the issues that tenants have and the issues that landlords have. And then start to build some solutions to the issues that we see. One of which includes looking for funding for landlords so that they can fix up their property without it being punitive on the tenants. So I didn't bring a pen and paper, but don't leave this room until I get your name and email or something, because there is some real movement on this finally. And we've got, as I say, the village is very aware of this. It's come up in their housing surveys, in the work they've been doing, and I think we're going to make some real progress. I was very enthusiastic about what came out of that conversation. There's a real commitment to this, so watch this space. But I would love to include you. Make sure.
That'd be great.
Yeah, and maybe provide some leadership.
And if I can connect you to advocates for basic legal equality, I'd be happy to do that.
The book I read, I was telling you at the beginning of Poverty by America, the author looks for reasons why we continue to have such high poverty rates. And one of the things he mentions is that poor people pay more for rent than wealthy people do. Because they are sort of a captive audience by the landlords who can just do what they want with them and force them to pay more. Whereas people with higher incomes and better off people have more leeway in terms of, getting up and leaving and doing that kind of thing. So this is one of the big problems in poverty in America in general, not just here in Yellow Springs.
Right.
I was going to ask all of you to define what poverty is. We think of poverty as an income issue, but it's much more than that, isn't it? Somebody already mentioned the stigma and somebody else mentioned stability. Would you mind going through the list of things that you think poverty involves? What's it like to be a poor person?
So I mentioned culture of poverty. In some ways, it's a mindset.
It's a what?
Mindset.
Ah.
It's a mindset of some people, because they can't escape the culture of poverty. They feel, whether it's right or wrong, that it's a never-ending cycle of being economically poor, being poor in the mind. You look at people talk about the SNAP program, and you talk about a financing class. Some people are in a state of poverty because they don't know how to budget. They simply don't know how to budget. And then what I've noticed with some people who are in poverty, sometimes they have this sense of entitlement that you need to help me because I'm poor. And how do you change and flip that mindset of people who are caught up in a culture of poverty where they feel like you owe me something?
Well, culture suggests that they've learned it from previous generations.
Yes.
If a family is poor, it tends to pass through generations because they don't know how to deal with it.
Exactly.
Well, I think there's also a lack of trust. I mean, we live under capitalism, and when you are generationally experiencing poverty and racism and classism, and that it's such a breakdown in trust of the system.
Don't forget sexism.
Yeah, that too, of course. That to regain or rebuild that trust by just offering a class or by offering a monthly payment. I mean, it's so much more complex than that. There are so many layers that, I mean, it's talking, like, just like having the conversation, it's like a horrible joke, but it's just like even talking about ending poverty in Yellow Springs. This is a small village full of people, a lot of people that care and have progressive politics and are interested in giving for the most part. But it's like you don't want to say it's impossible, but it's so complex. Let alone talking about like what the book is about, which is trying to figure out how this country has made has made a situation for so many poor people
Yes,
for so
we have a
long.
lot of political policies in effect that contribute to this.
Yeah.
We do, and when I think about poverty as really like limited opportunities for individuals, it's not just because there aren't programs or benefits or things that can, tangible things that can be accessed, but I think it has to do with relationships. And one of the things that we see is that, if there's an opportunity for someone to have relationships that help them move past poverty and have a different future that's more advantageous to them and their family, how do we find those relationships? There are some programs that have tried to do that, but they're usually nonprofit programs. There's not good funding for them. There's not sustainability of that funding to establish relationships with people in the community who can help people in poverty navigate all those complex rules that would move them out of poverty potentially. But I'm curious, the book that you read and the policies that keep people in poverty, one of the things that we advocate for it and keep coming up against are rules in public programs that as soon as someone moves up to a certain level, they're shot back down. So for example, one of the best ways to help someone be more successful is to grow their resources, right? But as soon as you reach a certain resource limit, then you're no longer eligible for a variety of programs.
And that's happening with why it's like.
Exactly. And so we ask people to build their resources, and then now you have to get rid of them so that you can be eligible for assistance again and be right back in that cycle. So there's got to be something that changes legislatively so that we address that, because we're just cycling people right back.
Yes, and we criticize those people for wanting to stay on welfare. Now you know why. That's right. They have no chance to get out. That's right.
This woman has had her hand up.
Oh, sorry. Oh, Louisa. Your question.
Well, I always have trouble getting myself together, but I've listened. And what seems to me is sort of basic what we're saying, that somehow I think we contribute to this poverty in our goodness. I think what you're doing is valuable, and just what you just said, there is something in this society that values that kind of monetary success, and that success in itself thrives on putting someone down, even with our those people that spend lots of money, and somehow they get they're very visual to all of us through the news. To me, it seems so ungenerous, because maybe I just look at it darkly, but I come from a place where money was no good. Even if you had money, you could be dead tomorrow. It didn't, maybe from very small on, but I think there are other countries that don't hang on this money for security or to raise themselves above other people, that maybe some kind of socialism or something. We are so quiet. It just disturbs me that it's right in front of us and we all have good intentions, and we can't fix this monstrous thing that keeps people in poverty, and we watch them having to not take care of their family or their children, and then you criticize them because they wear jewelry or they put the fingernail polish on them. All these good people say, well, if they're so poor, why are they spending? They don't manage their money right. But like you said, they have no opportunity because centuries of this oppression and sort of slavery. So I admire people that can be successful and money-wise and socially and all that. But I think it would behoove us to see what we contribute to that. And I sort of thought what I could contribute to is I don't want to take away anything, but I see my own selfishness in the face of someone who has no way out of this poverty, you know?
That's exactly what Matthew Jesmond says.
But I didn't read it.
Our own self-interest, which is justified. We have to take care of ourselves. But in many ways, we exploit people who are poor and use them to build ourselves up.
Yes.
And they have no choices about housing, where to live. They have no choices about going to what schools to go to. They don't have the money to go to private schools. They have to go to public schools, whether they're good schools or not. They don't have a choice for healthcare. They can't choose a doctor. They have to use the doctor that their Medicaid program says they have to use. If that's still true, I'm not sure. But anyway, they have no choices. They're stuck. And we're not even aware of it, that we're doing this. So, well, go on. What else? Let's see. Beth, what would you say about what poverty is?
So-
for people?
Well, I think I answered that, at least
You did.
regarding relationships. I mean, I
Yeah.
really think, and I agree with so much of what you
Yes.
said, but I think that the lack of opportunity is because we don't have the relationships to help people navigate. Right, anyhow, there was,
Or another.
I would like to lean into this narrative about what is poverty. And it's so many different things, so many different situations regarding so many different people and their circumstances. But what I would like to lean into right now is that we are all sitting in the senior center. And as a senior, I'm almost 100 years old. I am. I'm more than 2/3 of the way there. Okay? I've done everything that I've been told to do in this world. I've managed my money appropriately. I have a fairly decent credit rating. But they keep moving the finish line. They keep moving the point of destination. I have, as a senior, no new money coming in. Maybe if the stock market rises, but it usually does not. I have no new money coming in. We here are the most mature, the most wise people on this planet. And no one will hire us. And I will not volunteer or work for free because of that. In this town, everybody wants something new. And that hits the tax bracket. And then I say, what happened next? Those properties, I moved here in 2019. It is 2023 now. It is 4 years later. And my property tax has risen exponentially $1,000 every year. I have no intentions of being a poor person. But guess what has happened? I owe more than what I have in my savings. Am I the only senior in this room who has this problem?
No. Not, nor in the community.
All right. So
It's a big.
I would love to give the children a new school. I would also like to have a swimming pool in my backyard, but I can't afford either. There will be no swimming pool in my backyard, and I will be voting no on all of these things that everybody wants in this teeny tiny little village of 3,000 people. Of those 3,000, not all of them are adults. Of those who are adults, they may not be in a working situation. Okay, so I just wanted to add this to the conversation because we're sitting in the senior center. And we're talking about what poverty is, and for the most part, we're talking about, you know, people who might not have toilet paper or food. But the finish line for me, they keep moving it.
You sure do.
Yes, they keep moving it. And I have no intentions of being poor, but it seems to be happening. It seems to be happening to me against my will.
And who do you think is benefiting from that? If you're losing, somebody's benefiting.
I don't know. Who is it?
Good question. Maybe somebody can answer.
I'm just gonna speak up for the senior center, that when people are having challenges, we're here for you. Because we do know some of the channels that make a difference for people. And whether it's their medication, their housing, their personal care, all of that, there's a lot more assistance than a lot of people are aware of too. So we do love to be that channel that connects people.
I was looking like I said, I moved here 4 years ago, and I was looking in about 5 different communities. And what attracted me to Greene County, I moved from Montgomery County to here. What attracted me about Greene County is that they had lower property taxes. Not anymore. Oh, yeah, much lower than Montgomery County. Oh, my God. And I thought I was making
Not
a
in Yellow
move
Springs.
that would benefit me financially. They keep moving the finish line. And I will vote no on that school levy. But I think it's gonna pass. I used to be a school board member, but I was young then. I was young. I was late 30s, early 40s. And we put some levies on. They failed at first. We got the community together, had the community groups, brought in the facilitators to talk it back and forth until the levies passed. The seniors always complained, but I was young and naive. What goes around comes around. Oh, it comes back around. Susan.
I mean, I was thinking this.
You just had your hand up.
Yes, I know. Different people have mentioned now, I mean, who does it benefit to have a permanent class of poor people? And I didn't know if your book addressed that, because
Yes,
it certainly does. I mean, so what's your guys say?
It's the people who don't pay their taxes, which is mostly the wealthy people, because that means the rest of us have to pay for the things that our government spends money on. It's the people who, well, I'm one of these people. I have a retirement income, and my retirement income is subsidized by our government, which means your taxes are helping pay for my retirement. But poor people don't have that option. I had a house with a mortgage. The government subsidized my mortgage by letting me take a tax cut for my mortgage. Poor people don't have that option. We are benefiting and they're giving. We're getting and they're giving. That's what this author says. We might not agree with that, but it's nice to have all those benefits for us. He points out in his book that the welfare for the rich, which is in terms of what I just said, retirement benefits, mortgage benefits, other kind of benefits that rich people have that poor people don't have, those constitute a type of hidden welfare, which rich people get, but poor people's welfare is much less in the amount of money that's invested in that than what our government pays us for our benefits. So again, we're benefiting and they're not getting it, which is kind of hard to, first of all, it's hard to imagine that
you know, we think of welfare in the United States as being such a big expense in this country. Welfare for the rich is even more than welfare for the poor. Yeah, there's something wrong here.
I also wonder if welfare really exists. Can you address that question?
So, you know, it's interesting because, you know, when you talk about the stigma about particularly the public assistance programs, you know, one of the things that I have always tried to do, particularly when it comes to communicating with legislators who generally have a negative view of the programs, is we try to put a spin on what matters to them. So for example, what the economic impact in our communities is by having these programs, and how the landlords benefit, how the grocers benefit, how the hospitals and the doctors benefit, because it puts an enormous amount of income in the community. So, I mean, for example, these are Greene County only numbers. Last year, $40 million in SNAP food assistance were issued in Greene County that grocers then reaped the benefits of. Medicaid will just blow your mind, $274 million.
In Greene County.
Medicaid.
Oh, Medicaid. Well, I'll tell you one thing, on Medicare, I love it.
Yeah.
But I also tend to think of it as being a little bit like welfare for doctors and hospitals.
And that's the point that so, you know, trying to make in terms of, you know, what you were talking about who is benefiting. Much of what we have right now would not run without these programs. So we think many legislators think very negatively about them, and much of the public seems to think very negatively about them, and yet we're relying on them to have the infrastructure of all of these other services that we have in our communities because of the money that's going into them.
It's a two-edged sword.
It is.
Yes. Well, and I think when people hear welfare, they're thinking like, we're just paying people to not work and giving them cash.
Yes. Right. Historically, that's what welfare was.
But it's,
and what it was the program that gave cash to individuals just for no reason. And that does not exist anymore.
That's what I was
decades.
For decades. Yeah, I that's the point I was trying to get to.
Yeah, it doesn't
Yeah,
exist.
there is no welfare anymore.
No.
I like to visit this equity program. And, you know, I'm happy that this program exists and can help quite a few people for now. And hopefully it can be spread wider. And I'm kind of curious that is there any way to track the progress of the recipient by receiving this program? Certainly they're happier, and would that elevate them or making them have an initiative to jump over the poverty line and to have some kind of ambition? And I have to get out of this. And so that at the end, these people can continue with their life without the support of this equity. And I remember, well, my husband and I, we were married when we were really young, and we didn't know anything. And in a way, we decided to survive on our own, and we didn't have money. And you know, he worked here and there, and of course I have this language barrier, and so I was kind of useless. And so, but we want to be better. There is this incentive that we want to be better. We don't have a lot of money, but then we can produce our own food. And we don't buy a lot of stuff from the market. And we just try to make do with what we have. And one rule of our life was that we don't want to be in debt. And so we grow vegetable, we have chicken for the egg and chicken for the meat and goat for the milk. But you know, we don't need food stamp. We just try to avoid that. And so we eventually grew up and get wiser, and he got a better job. And so, you know, we got out of the property, and then on top of that, we got respect from our neighbors. You know, those kids, they're poor, they don't have nothing. And at one time, we wanted to buy a car, and so we went to the bank and what do you have? It's nothing. You know, oh, sorry, kids. We cannot loan you anything. So, you know, there has to be some fire inside, you know, these people that have the desire to elevate themselves.
Well, one thing that I would say about the YS Equity Program and about similar programs all over the country is we're not saying that anybody can support themselves with $300 a month. But what it does is it helps to create, you know, like an income floor, basically. It's like financial breathing. And, you know, your question regarding, you know, does it, you know, what are the other indicators that the program is working besides just people being able to pay their bills? And one of the most remarkable things that I see coming out of these studies that are happening with these guaranteed income programs is if you provide people with a little bit of space, right? Whether that's to be able to take a day off work so they can go to another job interview, or whether it's to take time off work to attend, you know, your kids or grandkids functions, but the mental health outcomes that are, and the improvements that are happening across just a span of a couple of years, that then, you know, the hope is that, and right, this is 2 years of a program, and when the 2 years is over, you don't get the $300 a month anymore. But it's the hope is that during that time, if you get a little bit of breathing room, that it's not just your debt that's going to be improved, right, or your monthly bills, but that there are so many mental health markers that are improving while people are enrolled in programs similar to this.
Yeah, I do believe with John thinking that poverty is a mindset, and that is the big thing. You know, I don't want to be in this situation. I want to improve myself. And certainly that $300 big help. You know, and like you said, that, you know, they open up their mind a little bit, and I do hope so that eventually they can get out of this support so we can do with other people.
Could I, oh, I'm sorry, there's a question back there, go ahead.
I have a question regarding a different topic.
Okay.
I wanted to discuss the topic of employment within the village.
Good, that's what I was gonna ask.
John Hollister, who's a friend of mine, will tell you that the retail employment is not our largest employer here. I think for many of us, it's the one that we see most often. We have one of our largest retailers here are paying the same exact wages that they did 15 years ago. Same exact wages. That's people who worked there, started there 15 years ago, are making the exact same wages that they make now, and people coming off the street are making the exact same wages. We have another larger retail employer that is very proud of the fact that they offer their employees health insurance and want everybody to know how few of their employees are taking advantage of that. Well, that's because they can't afford the premiums. Yeah. The premiums are so high that it takes the majority of the income level that they have. We also had an announcement at the last council meeting of the atrocious low amount of taxes that are being paid to the city or to the village on employment tax. Why is that? Because so many of our employers are paying under the table. They're not even taking taxes out, and they're not taking Social Security out. So not only are these individuals not able to qualify for any type of a loan, mortgage, rent, anything like that, because they can't prove their income, but they're never going to qualify for Social Security either, because they don't have any income that's going towards the Social Security. So if you want to know who is benefiting, it's our employers. It's the employers that are keeping the lowest people here in Yellow Springs low.
That's a nationwide problem.
Yep.
And it's because we, consumers, like goods to be cheap. If we were willing to pay a little bit more for things, the way most Europeans do, go to a grocery store in Europe, you're gonna pay a heck of a lot more for your goodies than you have here. Our farmers can't even make enough money to keep their farms going. Farms are going under like crazy here. It's a consumer business issue. Cheap goods attract customers, but cheap goods do not pay employees. And that's one of the big problems here, according to the book I read. I was going to ask John if he could give us a picture of what it's like for a kid to be poor.
Well, I want to hear what Joan has to say.
Oh,
Yeah.
John, okay, sorry.
Yeah, that's okay.
A real quick thing, John. I'm concerned about the kids at Mills Lawn, and you know who needs help and who doesn't. Right now, do you need cards for the parents to buy food? Or more important, do you need help with what do you need help?
I would say cars with groceries.
Groceries
would be the number one priority. One of the concerns, the holidays are really tough on families.
Yeah.
And if we can help supplement money that they need for groceries, that gives them more disposable income to help their kids.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
I just want to say, as a parent of Mills Lawn's kids, I want to thank Mr. Gudgel for all that you do. You have such a positive impact on all kids' lives, not just kids who, really need you, but all kids. You're such a gem in this community. And I wonder if you feel supported by the community, and if you feel support within the school structure to keep doing what you're doing. And do you feel that you have others that are also doing what you're doing? I guess what I'm saying is you have so much valuable information about the families here. You have so many relationships. And if that value isn't shared among the community and we don't all have that concern, then, I worry about that just kind of falling to the wayside over time. And I know with the levy being such a tense situation, that morale is down within the schools. And so this is kind of a big question. I'm not sure if it makes sense, but I guess just, do you feel like that you have support to keep doing what you're doing? And do you see that there is stamina there for what you and a lot of other staff are doing?
Fortunately, I feel like I'm an independent contractor within the school system. Being here for as long as I've been, and being a native of Yellow Springs has given me additional insight into the community that perhaps other people don't have. And I feel as though the administration is trusting of my judgment in terms of helping kids and families in needs. And I feel as though my so-called, well, I'm not gonna say so-called, I feel as though my accessibility to families trust me to come to me when there's a need. I mean, that's a difficult position for people when they're caught up in poverty, is to reach out to trusted individuals. I mean, I don't want to expose myself by signing on those lines that I need help from the community foundation. I need help from Home Inc. I need help from Greene County. I feel like there are no barriers for the most part for families to come to me.
Right, and that's so valuable. I guess I'm just saying, like, I don't know, you can't just like, create that as something that is very unique. And I also just want it to be, I know that you're influencing people, and I would hope that there is space and support in this community that can continue, because you don't always just have a program in one channel to find the folks that need the help. You have to really have the insiders in there that are trusted.
So I was just listening to your question and John's answer, and I wondered how it related to what Beth said before about how important relationships are, because that's what you've done, because you're you and you've got the experience and the trust. I mean, and that's something that we should think about, because we have the possibility in this community, because we're small, of building those connectors and those trusts and that sense of that can sometimes, and I'm looking at Beth, maybe supplement, the check for TANF or the $300 from YS Equity. And it'd be interesting to see if we could how we would build more of that kind of trusting relationships. And I don't know if I'm putting words in your mouth, but is that what you're talking about?
It is.
Okay.
Support isn't just the money that you need to pay your bills. The support of people and those relationships that, help individuals have hope, have knowledge about what they can do differently that maybe they haven't either had an example of or haven't felt that they have the opportunity to learn about. John's a perfect example of a relationship opportunity for many people. And your question is great, because how do you expand on that? How do you sustain it? You're a unique individual. What if we have Johns everywhere?
Right. What if we had 20 more Johns? I mean, in some ways, I'm sorry, Florence is not here, because I think from what I know of what Florence does, I think she is another example of somebody who builds a connection, builds trust. There's some amorphous stuff. I don't have all the words, but that stuff, like the ability that people feel a kind of sense of relief that they're not, that poverty is not bearing down on them physically and emotionally, and having somebody that they could share the challenges with makes an enormous difference. We might want to think about a program where we build 20 more Florences and 20 more Johns. Really.
Florence and I communicate all the time.
Right, I can only imagine. And right, the senior center is another example.
Not the senior center, the Village Impact Project is waiting for more mentors to be matched with children and students. And that program is a valuable resource for the families. It gives the parents a break. It gives the children somebody else to be with. And it's reciprocated that the adult that's participating is getting to share that knowledge and feel like they've made a connection with someone.
So I'm embarrassed to say I don't know anything about that. And I, not that, I know everything, but I do have my, I do pay attention to stuff and I don't know about it. So I'm just saying, maybe I'm not the only one. Maybe we need an article in the Yellow Springs News about it, more on a regular basis, more.
I mean, it's akin to a Big Brothers Big Sisters program, but it's not a Big Brothers Big Sisters program because we don't want to get in trouble.
Well, I think we need to mention the food bank.
Yeah, there are actually 7 or 8 different programs in Yellow Springs to help people with their needs. John runs one, the unofficial one. There's several others that if you have a need, John or Florence can get you in contact with those programs.
I think it's almost time to, I'm sorry, question. After this question, we're gonna wind up a little bit.
Right, I see there's time to go, and I've been listening carefully. It's such an important conversation. I've lived in this town, I've raised 5 children here. I know that housing is the key. That's what I experienced over the last 40 years, is the key. And I think that we all grieve when we see people having to leave our own children, leave town, our grandchildren, our beloved friends, leave town. I run into, I have been working in Springfield, and I run into people all the time whose families lived for generations in Yellow Springs and now live in Springfield. So how can, and I'm looking at Emily, and I know you're working so hard, Emily, with Home 8, how can we prioritize keeping our loved ones in our community on an ongoing basis? And I'm happy that some people like yourself have moved here recently. I know we've had a lot of retirees. I want to see this community continue to be a place where children and families who have children can live, because that's what makes a thriving community, in my opinion. So I'm putting that out there, having experienced hard times and better times. I want to know how we can keep the people that live here and are loved here, how can we keep them here? I know that's been debated a lot.
Emily, you want to add anything to that?
Well, I think that's an important question that we should be asking at council meetings. That we should be, going and when the council's putting their budget together, be thinking about that, going to the community foundation, because I think it's going to take all of us working together. It's more than, it's incredibly challenging, to create new affordable housing, but then also to access the resources to help people stay in their homes. So we talked about a few tools that we have in place, but I think it's really important that this is a priority, along with jobs, as you said earlier, because jobs and housing are both important, but really housing is the center, and a lot flows out from there, and it's connected to a lot of different things. So I think making sure that we're just continuing to advocate that we would like to prioritize housing affordability specifically in this community, not just for newly created housing, but also for existing residents. So that's partly a policy thing. It's partly private philanthropy. It's partly, thinking about legacy planning, estate planning. There are a lot of different ways to approach it, but in terms of keeping people from being displaced, I think YS Equity is like trying to help with that. I have a closing statement that kind of addresses that a little bit too, but I also welcome ideas that folks have, or anything that you want to share, not now because we're wrapping up, but later. I think we want to make sure we're hearing from people, because I think it's really hard.
Right, and I just want to briefly illustrate, I have my children, 2 live out of state, but of the 3 who live in the area, one lives in Dayton, one lives in Clifton, one lives in Yellow Springs in a Home 8 house. All 3 of those families send their children to Yellow Springs schools through open enrollment. I'm so glad they do. They're 3rd generation Yellow Springs school students. One family lives in Dayton, one lives in Clifton. So our family's not uncommon. That's how it works. I also just want to give a shout out to the Yellow Springs News. I think it was Riley Dixon who wrote about Hawthorne Place after the fire over there. And all of us, I certainly do know people who've lived and suffered in those apartments with raccoons and cockroaches and et cetera, flooding. And I appreciate that those people were outed in the national.
It took someone 3 months to get hot water after moving in. 3 months to get hot water.
I think it's time for our closing statements. Emily has one. Evan, go ahead, get yours out of the way.
All right, yeah, so there's, I mean, this is too much to address in one session, but just as people were talking, a few things occurred to me, and one is that we've talked a lot about attitudes and ambition and sort of the personal aspect of poverty. And I think that that's certainly worth exploring and important. There's a great organization called Think Tank in Springfield, and they have their own definition of poverty and cultures of poverty. And they have a beautiful training you can go to because it's very challenging to be in poverty. It's not, I mean, I know that sounds very, but it really is. There's a lot of very nuanced skills that you have to be able to juggle all these different challenges. And so, and they talk about the skill sets and sort of culture around generational poverty, which is different than situational poverty. I grew up in situational poverty. Generational poverty is a whole other experience. Then, and there are beautiful things that come from that too, like a real reliance on family and relationships, really focusing on the present. You know, there are cultural attributes. There are cultural attributes of the middle class too, which, you know, tend to be more forward looking, and then the wealthy, which tend to be looking to the past. But beautiful training, and I think we need language to be able to talk about this stuff. But I also think that it's really important when we're focusing on issues like poverty that we don't just focus on individual decision making, but we take a step back and look at the systems, structures, and policies that are created it in the first place, because poverty is not necessary. It was created. Yes. And it's sustained by the systems that we all interact with, including racism. And I know I just want to lift up what you said earlier, because there's a great book by Heather McGhee called The Sum of Us. And it talks about how, yes, it's really important to note that the majority of people receiving benefits in America are white people, but the policies that created and sustain poverty have a racial bias. And so Black people in particular are hurt first and worst, but white people are also hurt. And that's one of the reasons that America can't get ahead, because we'll drain the pool before we integrate it. I mean, to give a classic example. So just things I just wanted to say that. And you know, if you look at the pie in America, if you carved up the pie in America of all the wealth, and you looked over the last several decades, the top is getting bigger and bigger. And now the poorest 20% of Americans have negative pie. They don't even get a fork, you know?
A crust.
They don't do anything. So I think I just wanted to sort of mention that. And I also want to reiterate what everybody else said about trust and relationships. And I think that's the reason that I really love that there is a local organization working on housing, because we get to be accountable, and a developer that doesn't go away, and we're here. But we've never had a foreclosure. And the reason in part is because people feel comfortable reaching out before the sign's on the door. And then I also wanted to say that I think in the Racial Equity Institute training, they talk about sort of that white savior complex around charity, around interacting with people in poverty, and how important it is that we remember that charity is an inadequate response to systemic oppression, and that one of the most important things to do is create access to power. And so I think, you know, the mentoring work that's being done is critical, the coaching that you're doing. but I think to me, that's really like locally, that is so important. In addition to creating more resources dedicated to things like affordable housing and universal basic income and funds for groceries and food. I also think that I'll just read this from the think tank website, and they said, over the last 50 years, the poverty rate has remained unchanged in the United States, and people are more divided than ever on solutions. Heather McGee would call this an opportunity for the solidarity dividend, which you can actually get stuff done that makes it better for everybody if you're willing to do that. Rather than new approaches are needed, rather than top-down strategies, poverty alleviation happens when those with personal experience in poverty connect with leaders working towards solutions, and together they're the architects of personal and community transformation. And some great examples of that would be the Bridges Out of Poverty program, Circles program, where you're creating those networks of support, which is what you were talking about. So
Thanks. John, do you have any final statement?
Thank you for being a difference maker, a positive difference maker for our kids. When I see a young person smile because they've been given something that they were lacking, you're making a difference. I forgot to mention, we do have a breakfast program because we have some kids who come to school, they're hungry. So we do have a breakfast program. So thank you.
Yeah, the only thing I want to do is put a plug in for, please vote for issue 20, which is our children's services levy. It's vital for the protection of children in our community.
And my plug is just to say that there is a new YS Equity Lottery. It's open from November 1st through the 15th. If anybody is interested or knows anybody who's interested, please take a flyer with you, and I'll be here to answer questions too. And just a little note, people have been asking, because folks sometimes need to apply more than once. You apply, you don't get it, you apply the next time. You do have to keep applying. And the application this time, if anybody's taken it before, it's going to be way, way shorter moving forward because we're not involved in as much research moving forward as we have to.
Is your application online?
Yes, and there's a little QR code here into ysequity.org. You can access it. And the application itself will only be open the 1st to the 15th.
Thanks all for.
Thank you.
Leave the room.
Sorry if I-